PJNet.TV. It is 9:30 East Coast time, Wednesday night. You are watching this live, if that's what time it is, where you're at. And we are recording and we are streaming to Facebook. We are streaming to Twitter. We are streaming to YouTube. And our chat room is waiting. Our guest is waiting. We will start a countdown to Lucky Studio 13 starting now. Well, good evening and welcome back, or welcome, whichever the case may be, to PJNet.TV. I'm your host, Coach Prasic, and behind me you see, if those of you familiar with PJNet and me know that I am a World War II history fanatic. In fact, last night, in spite of being behind on everything that I'm doing, I took a mental health break and watched a World War II documentary. I did. And I know all about Battle of the Bulge. But Michelle Medlock Adams sends her regards and says that she misses us and hopes to be back very soon. Believe it or not, she's working on a deadline, or at least that's the excuse that she used, so that she could have her friend come on board and share with us. And here she is, Kayleen Reusser. Okay, I'm going to put that name. Hey, I got lucky and said it right the first once. I'm not going to repeat it. I'll just say Kayleen, an unusual spelling. Now, by the way, get this spelling right. I'm going to put her website up on the screen, KayleenReusser.com. But the spelling, if you need to stop the video to write that down, do so. Kayleen, Michelle, how much notice did she give you that you were doing this tonight?
About 24 hours.
Oh, well, you're among the very lucky.
Well, she sent it last night and I read it this morning, so I don't know if that counts as 24 hours, but I'm willing.
For her, it does, yeah. Well, it's a lot more notice than I got, okay. But
oh, okay.
But she assured me that you were an advocate for veterans and all things veteran. And I am excited to hear that, because to tell you a true story is that the grocery store the other night, and there was a person parked in the handicapped place there, and I noticed when they came out they were wearing a U.S. Navy cap. Now, Kayleen, I don't care what day of the year it is, every day of the year I go out of my way. I stopped and said, "Sir, I just want to thank you for your service." Well, it turns out that guy works with my wife, and my wife said, "How do you know him?" I said, "I don't. I just know that he's a veteran." And
every American needs to do that.
Well,
needs to be attentive to our veterans.
Right. I mean, how hard is that, folks?
Exactly.
And how much does it mean to our veterans to just make a simple acknowledgement of the fact they write a blank check. They write a blank check, really. And so veteran, even though I have never served, veterans have a very, very special place in my heart, and it sounds like maybe you got the same notion. Are you a veteran, Kayleen?
I am not, but I'm married to one.
Okay.
I am married to an Air Force airman who put in 21 years, and our son is an Air Force officer. And so what I do is in honor of them personally, but it's also to honor the vets I've gotten to know especially over the last decade. And if you would like to hear how I got started, I've interviewed 260 World War II veterans. And that's men and women.
They're getting harder to find.
Oh, actually, at this point, I haven't been interviewing anybody now for maybe even 2 years. Well, of course, because of COVID last year. At this point, World War II veterans are in their late 90s. I have interviewed a woman a few years ago who was 100 years old. And I can tell you, she got out of her chair better than I do. She was just the most spry little thing. And she had been a nurse in England. And she just had all kinds of things to tell me and show me. And, every story is unique. And every veteran has a right to have their story told. And in many cases, I've recorded them. It all began about 2012. I was writing for our local newspaper, and I live in Northeast Indiana, by the way. And that will come up in a little bit too, but I just thought you should know that. And he asked me to interview a World War II veteran who lived in our area. And I'm ashamed to say I knew barely anything about World War II. Basically, the year of Pearl Harbor, the date of Pearl Harbor, and then the year that the war ended. And that was just about it. So I went and interviewed a man named Carl Mankey. He had been a Marine in the Pacific. And he told me about places called Tinian, Tarawa, Peleliu. Never heard of them before. It felt like to me he had marbles in his mouth. And I thought, what is that? Well, he told me those were islands that the Japanese were on, that the Marines invaded to try to push them back to the mainland of Japan to have a major invasion there and end the war. And he got out his shadow box, which was quite large, of all of his medals, and he had 2 Purple Hearts, meaning he had been injured twice in battle. And during this interview, I'm just madly scrambling, to get the information because it's all new to me. But I felt like I was sitting in front of a living piece of history.
You are.
And I loved museums, but I had never, ever talked to anyone about an event like this. And it just made me want to preserve more stories. So I began looking for other veterans around where I lived, and of course then neighboring counties. And I just put the word out on social media. People told me about their parents or their neighbors, and that's how it went from there. I've had newspaper columns of stories. I just am finishing 10 books about World War II since 2014. 9 of them have been written since 2017. The first one is right behind you there, We Fought to Win. And I have tried to include women in every book, but by far the majority are men. And it is every branch. I don't look for just Marines or Army. I'm very intrigued to find Coast Guard in Indiana. That's pretty hard to do. But I was able, actually, I even have a female Coast Guard officer. And that means she was a college graduate before she decided to join the Coast Guard. And at that time, we were just coming off of the Depression. This was not something where it just ended. It was, very gradual that people started to have a little bit more money. So she had graduated from college and then decided to serve her country. So I felt very, happy to have that interview. And so my goal is just to raise patriotism, because I've been very distressed in recent years. Something happened I've never known before, for people to not be proud of our country. Right. And I don't like that. And I could get mad, or I could write books. And my husband would much prefer that I write books. So, I'm not doing it just for our national heritage. That was my original goal. And now I'm doing it to try to provide good role models. We don't have any, our kids don't have good role models anymore. There just isn't anybody. I've written 16 children's books, and actually that's how I got introduced to Michelle Medlock Adams. She was teaching a class at the college where I worked, and I took the class, and she encouraged people to apply to a certain children's book publisher, and I did, and I took it from there, and so I'm very indebted to her. But, I was I only would write about good role models, and it got harder and harder to find them. So I feel like the book that you have there behind you, my Women of World War II coloring book, I put that together to try to encourage kids to learn about these women who had been very brave in enlisting. There was no draft for women. They were all volunteers. But, that was not a war that women were encouraged to do by especially their family members. Their mothers were some of their biggest detractors. They didn't want them putting on a uniform and um, going into the military because they might not be marriageable after the war. So,
I'll share this with you, and I have studied the subject, and both sides did this.
mhm,
Both sides. Uh, Most of the women heroes of World War II did not wear a uniform. In fact, they weren't wearing anything at all. They were
mm,
spies,
mhm,
and you know, it war brings out the best and the worst, you know, and things change. And there were so many women. I don't want to call them prostitutes. They were spies, but they clearly sex was the choice of weapons, you know, and I reserve my judgment. I really do,
mm,
because
mhm.
you know, men are out there, or traditionally men are out there killing. That's certainly not good. So, but women served in many cases behind the lines in supply and in the hospitals and nursing
Mhm,
capacities if they had that
mhm,
skill. But many, many, many women served, and they will never be recognized for their service because they were spies. And
mm,
and they were very effective, particularly in France in the resistance
mm,
movement, because
mhm, mhm.
women, generally speaking, you know, in that age, women were not treated the same as men with regard to. You don't see a woman as a female combatant, you know,
Oh
and you
no,
know,
no, no.
and military men in that day tended to be more gentlemanly and chivalrous. So women were better at it because they were looked upon with less suspicion.
Mhm.
But there are many, you know, women. There are women pilots.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Well, actually, that's who I put on the cover there of the coloring book. She
Okay.
was a WASP, and that stands for Women Air Service Pilots.
A wasp.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's actually featured. That woman lived near me. She's been deceased since 2008, but she is featured in Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation.
Well, I'm glad
So
you brought that up,
yeah,
because that I didn't know he had a book by that title, but that generation, my father was among them. I hold them in the very, very highest of
mm-hmm,
esteem because they
mm-hmm,
changed the world. They saved the world,
yes,
literally
yes,
saved the world. And the thing that I just hold on to is that was a time when our nation was, we were all in, we were all together. Didn't matter if you were Jewish, didn't matter if you were Christian, Protestant, Catholic, white, black. It did nothing mattered. We were
mm-hmm,
all together. And folks, when we get together and get focused on that, okay, I don't know anything we can't do. We could put a man on. Oh, we did. um, and I yearn for those days. And
I do
unfortunately,
too.
it
Oh, I
unfortunately it takes
do.
a crisis. It seems. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
after 9/11, churches were full. Remember that?
Yes,
We
yes, yes,
and I've
yes.
seen acts of heroism on that day. We've played documentaries here of the boat lift from Manhattan back to the
Mm,
main. That was
mm.
larger. Now, are you familiar with the miracle at Dunkirk?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Oh,
That
yes.
couldn't hold a candle to the evacuation from Manhattan after 9/11.
Mm. Mm-hmm,
And it was
mm-hmm,
just
mm.
spontaneous. And Americans were Americans. It didn't matter who you were. We're all together. And I yearn so much
I do
for the
too.
return to that. Okay, we can worship differently. We can be different colors. You
Mm-hmm,
know, we can be from different ethnic backgrounds, and we can celebrate
mm-hmm,
our differences. But by golly, when was the last time we were really together? World War II.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Oh, I've even told some of the vets because they emphasized over and over how they were, and especially the people even here on the home front. You know, you didn't have to be a soldier overseas to be working
Hmm.
towards victory. It was the people here at home. They were doing
Remember the vic-
scrap drives and
remember
bond
the vic-
drives, and
remember the Victory Garden.
oh yes,
Remember those?
actually, yeah, I have a story in my book. It was our War II. I don't know if you have it. I might have here. I've got my copy here. There's a story here of a very young girl who was the winner of a prize for her first victory garden. She had never had a garden before. And this book is just about, it's not about veterans. Actually, this is my only book that's not about veterans. It's about people who were children in the war.
Mm.
But most of the stories in the book are about children who were overseas in Western Europe, Romania, Australia, and how their lives were affected. They were living through the war, homelessness and so on. So, and I did interview those people.
Yeah. Have you, you've been to Normandy?
Yes. Yes, in 2017, my husband and I took a 10-day World War II tour of Europe, which was a group tour, and we went to France, Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Mm-hmm. The main thing in Luxembourg was Patton's grave.
One of our greatest generals falls to not enemy fire, but to a traffic accident, and buried in an obscure grave in Germany. And he was such a mighty warrior. And something that struck me that really war just brings out the best and the worst, of us.
Yes.
But an amazing thing that I just my jaw just hits the floor when you see these American veterans. They will go on those tours and they will meet some of their former opponents, and they will talk, and it's like I can't believe the healing. And those soldiers, I watched a documentary last night on the highest ranking ace in the German tank battalion. He was the highest ace. And we were talking, they were interviewing several people, but I understand the ideologies and all of that, the clash of ideas, but most of the people in the field are there just fighting to protect their buddies and fighting. They're not really necessarily into the politics of the matter. They're just doing their jobs.
And they were forced. They were drafted as well as like our guys were. They were drafted. Germany got so desperate for replacements near the end that they were putting the Hitler Youth in there.
Oh, yeah, there was 14-year-old boys.
As young as 14. My new book, which is just coming out, as far as if everything goes as scheduled, it's to be released June 1st, which is the Battle of the Bulge book. There's even a Stars and Stripes newspaper article that said that they were using men up to age 60.
Oh, yeah. I've seen pictures of little 14-year-old German youth being issued up what was called a Panzerfaust. So it's think of it as it's a tank. It's a bazooka of sorts. I won't go into all the details, but I mean, this thing was a tank weapon, and you fired it at close range, and yes, you're right. 60-year-old men. I mean, what do you equip them with? A pitchfork and a shovel? I mean,
I can't even see them getting in the tank. And most people were just fighting for their homeland, and there's so many good things. When you went and talked to the Marines over in the Pacific Theater, that was the bloodiest theater. We took incredible losses. The theory was that we needed to capture those islands to establish an air base from which to prosecute an air war. And Curtis LeMay, if you remember him, he was ruthless, which, by the way, is the most compassionate thing you can do in war, is prosecute it ruthlessly and end it. And get it over with,
Get it over with and end it peacefully and victoriously. But the Marines took incredible casualties. They were almost unsustainable. Iwo Jima, and the Japanese were masters of building defensive tunnel systems, and even the Japanese snipers would tie themselves to the trees that they were in, so that when you shot them, they wouldn't fall to the ground. So you wouldn't know that, because a lot of sniper, it slows you down because you're looking everywhere. So, he's,
Mm-hmm.
they fought ferociously,
Mm-hmm.
ferociously. And every inch of ground was fought for, and so many died. And the horrors.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell you what, your husband's in the Air Force, but let me tell you that the Navy corpsman is the
Mm.
most revered character to a Marine.
Mm.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
and I heard the horror stories of the Normandy landings,
Mm.
and some. In fact, I took a tour of Europe, and two of the people there were veterans of Normandy
Oh.
specifically.
Oh
So,
my gosh. Oh.
and one was a corpsman, and he said,
Mm. Mm.
when somebody was crying out in anguish, they were always calling for their mother,
Their mother. Oh.
always calling for their mother. Yeah, how sad.
They're just young boys.
Yeah,
A lot of them would have been under 20.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
the
it was,
average age. Now, your husband's in the Air Force. What would he
and
think?
he's retired, I should
Retired.
say.
Okay. What would he think of a captain of a flying fortress? That's a big plane. The average age of the captain was 22.
Mm-hmm.
22. Do you
Yeah.
know 22-year-olds today can't tell me what three-quarters of a tank of gas means? But
I they had to grow up awful fast.
they don't know how to jump a car off.
No.
But they're getting Aunt Jemima off the syrup labels. Bless their hearts.
And the another problem is a lot of these guys had quit high school to now I live in the Corn Belt, so a lot of the men I've interviewed were farmers or
Hmm.
raised on farms. And so a lot of them had quit school to farm because, as I was saying about the depression was just easing out, I should say, and they needed to be at home to help.
Hmm.
And so they didn't even have a great education, and then they're sent to these classes, ground school to be navigators and bombardiers, and of course, the Army and the Navy and the Marines, they were all doing this kind of thing. And I'm thinking, I don't even think some of them could read very well.
Yeah.
So they had very high illiteracy rate. I
Yeah.
didn't know that until I started interviewing guys.
There was no Air Force in World War II. It was the
Correct.
Army Air Corps.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I'm fascinated with the title "Battle of the Bulge." What stands out as what factoid, what little nugget of history stands out in your mind? There's so many bizarre things that
There are.
happened. What are some of
Well,
the twists and turns that you discovered in that battle?
I will say the subject that was talked about the most among the 25 men who I have featured in that book was the matter of foxholes. Now, this Battle of the Bulge started December 16th, 1944 through the end of January of 1945. During that 5 and 6 week period there, they didn't have snow at the very beginning of the invasion there, invasion of the Germans attack, but its snow started falling, and it turned out to be one of the very worst type of weather conditions that region had ever known. Sub-zero temperatures. I heard many men talk about 30 below, snow up to your knees or higher, which is 2 feet or so, and foxholes had to be. They were sleeping in them with snow. And I said, well, how did you even, to many of them, I'd say, how did you dig them when the ground was frozen? And they would have had in their backpacks, which weighed at least 30 pounds, maybe even 40 pounds. They would have had a small collapsible
Hmm.
shovel,
Hmm.
which they called an entrenching tool. And so some of the guys would say that they couldn't get through the frozen ground, so they'd just look for a foxhole that was already established. Others told me it's amazing what adrenaline can do for you.
Hmm.
From fear, the adrenaline of fear. So it was, I just heard about foxholes from every veteran. So I put a whole section in there about foxholes. But probably the most outstanding story is about the siege at Bastogne.
Yep.
Which I'm assuming you're very familiar with.
Very.
Yeah, Anthony McAuliffe.
I was gonna bring it up, but go ahead.
Yeah, good, good. Well, we happened to go there on our 10-day tour, so it was pretty special to be in the very same rooms where the 101st Airborne had been holed up. They were told to secure the village. The village of Bastogne in Belgium had 7 roads radiating out from it like a hub of a wheel. So whoever held Bastogne basically held that area of Belgium, of the Ardennes forest. So the Germans wanted it, but thankfully the 101st Airborne got there first, just by a matter of hours. So they were trying to hold on to it, but their supplies were running out because the skies were so low cloud cover and gray that the Army Air Corps couldn't get through to drop supplies to them. So they were just barely hanging on. And at one point, 2 German couriers, I guess you could say, came in, approached the camp with white flags, apparently, and said, we have a message that our German officer says you must surrender or we will take you out. So General Anthony McAuliffe, who was very valiant, he had one word, the one word reply. Do you want to say it?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Because, well, first of all, let me just emphasize what you just said. Bastogne was strategically, we had to hold it, okay, because that was the route to the fuel line. You know, whoever had that had the advantage. They became known as the Battling Bastards of Bastogne. And it was tough. Now, the Germans, for all the bad things you can say about Hitler, and you would be right, but the soldiers and the officers were skilled in the art of war. So what you do is you present, you go to the enemy before you slaughter everybody. You say, look, you're outnumbered. We're on elevated positions. We've got, we don't have to do this, okay? If you want to surrender, you will be treated respectfully and blah, blah, blah. And that is the message that was brought in, and it got a one-word reply. And you and I both know that word, and it was nuts. Nuts. And that goes, and of course they have to translate it, and they're saying, what do you mean nuts? What does that mean they surrender or what? What is? And they were perplexed. They literally didn't know what he meant what thought he was trying to convey, but he was basically just.
Yeah. Oh, I thought that was so funny.
And of course, Patton was furiously driving north to relieve them. And they were going through some incredible things. In fact, Eisenhower asked him, and Eisenhower and Patton were pretty much buddies. I mean, they, he said, George, how long is it going to take you to get there? George said, I can be there in 3 days. And Ike said, no, just George, just stop tell me how long it really will take you. And he said 3 days. And he made it. And in doing so, he had, his tanks were running out of gas. Well, he would commandeer gas from wherever they were at. They just stole it. And Patton was reputed to have said, the men can eat their belts, but these tanks need gas. And he had previously, in the Italian campaign, they were crossing a bridge and there was a mule. Have you heard of this one? The mule?
No.
There was a farmer had his mule on the bridge, crossing the bridge. And you know how donkeys are. They're stubborn. And so, the whole line has come to a halt and Patton comes running up there. What's going on? And of course they're trying to get this donkey to move. And Patton pulled out his pistol and just shot the thing.
His ivory-handled pistols.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, he did. And there is so much, that the good and the bad, the very best and the very worst of us come out in those times. And I am grateful for the work that you're doing to preserve, and not just preserve it, but Kayleen, we've got to bring it forward. We've got to make changes. We've got a generation that is more concerned over Aunt Jemima on a bottle of syrup than they are the lessons that we fought and died and bled for.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the history books aren't teaching it.
no. Do you know our current history books talk about how World War II was ended with the, Hiroshima and Nagasaki? They don't even mention how the war started. They don't even mention that. So it seems like genocide, And of course they don't present the argument. I mean, we didn't do that for, hey, let's just kill a bunch of Japs because we can. No. We had estimated casualty rates as high as 1 million to retake that.
Yes.
Because we had already learned on those islands that you have done the research on. You don't get that easy. And of course they were retreating and retreating. By the way, the Germans, very clever, they were very smart. They were retreating out of France. And now a retreating army tends to set booby traps. You know what I mean? That's not something. So slow down the pursuing, okay, fine. Well, the Germans were smart because all booby traps have to have a tripwire. Okay. Something triggers it. Well, typically you would put that on the door, so when the guy opens the door, bang, and, oh, no. They didn't do that. They would put it on a picture on the wall, and they would tilt the picture a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and they did that for a reason. First of all, by that time, there's more than one person in the house. Okay, they're clearing the house. But an officer would be the one to say, oh. So you get a higher value target. You get multiple targets. You kill multiple. That's how smart. They had this down. They had this down to a science. And you have to admire the leadership on both sides, the military leadership, not the ideology. But they were matching wits, and they were good at it.
They had rockets
on all sides.
I mean, the 262s. If they wouldn't have run out of fuel, that war would have gone on a long time because they had these rockets, and a lot of my guys would talk about finding abandoned tanks. They're Panzer tanks just sitting alongside the road, abandoned because they ran out of fuel.
Right.
So,
they ran out of time. The V-2 rocket, the architect of that was Vernon von Braun.
Yes.
You know what he later became?
Yes. Well, he defected. He came over here.
At the end of the war, we basically kind of forgave him about any ideology.
Yes.
But he put a man on the moon for us.
I know where he's buried.
You do?
I do. You wouldn't believe it. It's actually not even a stone. It's just a flat surface in the cemetery in Alexandria, Virginia. He's a friend who lived there, took me there, and it's kind of under a tree, but it's not anything fancy. So anyway, I mean, he did what he could for us after. He probably just didn't like the way things were going, and people have to make decisions during war, and it can be costly.
I captured, Einstein was.
Yes.
So they had the brains, they had the brawn, they had many advantages. Their tanks were superior to ours in every way. In fact, that was part of the problem. They were expensive to build, didn't have many spare parts, and they would have lasted 12 years, but the war didn't. Our tanks were, they called them the Ronson. You know why they called it the Ronson?
Because they lit up very well.
Remember the old lighter, the Ronson lighter?
Yes.
Lights first every time.
We went through a tank museum in Bastogne. A tank museum. There were tanks there from around the world. Now, I confess I didn't get into that much, but the men on our trip really enjoyed that. So it was very educational, and I would really encourage people, if they can't get overseas, to go to the World War II Museum in New Orleans.
That's right.
It's the National World War II Museum. It's humongous. It's a complex now of, I think, 6 buildings. But they just added a Hilton hotel. So, and it's all decorated in the 40s. So it looks really great. But you could stay there and then walk to the museums and take your time. And we go for 2 days because we read everything and we don't want to rush. And it's fantastic. I've been there twice, and I would go tomorrow if I could. So I always want to give a plug for that. And another plug, if I could, is for our honor flight of Northeast Indiana. Some of the, there's a photo that's very precious to us. That's my husband there with the hat on. Our daughter, this is in Washington, D.C., at, of course, the Indiana part of the World War II Memorial. And that special man in the middle is named Bill Sawyer. And he became a friend, very good friend of ours. After the honor flight was over, my husband was honored to be his guardian. And this was in 2016. And Bill just passed away last year. So we often got together to chat with him. And that was a great, great opportunity. I was able to take 2 veterans that same year on 2 other trips. And I just think I would have never gotten to know them if I hadn't interviewed them. In fact, it was during their interviews I would always ask the vets, because I was writing a newspaper column of World War II stories, and I always wanted to put a plug in for our honor flight. So you had a picture there. Can you go back to it? Book 3. It was We Gave Our Best. There was a picture of a lady at the top of that cover whose name is Lucille Clark. And that is the lady I took. Yep, that's her in both of the pictures there. She's got her arms folded on the book. She was in the Navy. And when she was 95, I was privileged to be her guardian. That was us standing in front of the Vietnam War Memorial. And she just turned 100 on Christmas Day of 2020 and would have had a big party, but of course with COVID couldn't do that, but we could send her cards and things. So, that was so much fun. And if I hadn't been inspired, I guess, to do these interviews, I wouldn't have gotten to go on the honor flights or know these wonderful people. So I feel very blessed through the whole experience of interviewing him. It was quite a lot of time that had to go into it because I was working at the time in a middle school library and I could only interview on Saturdays. So it was, but it was so much fun. I learned something new in every interview. And they were all blessings to me, and I hope I was to them.
Well, Kayleen, for 20 minutes, we've been having a lot of fun for about 40, and I wish we could stay longer, but Kayleen, I just want to say this. Thank you. Thank you for chronicling, preserving, inscribing an important part of the American experience. The work you're doing is so vital, and I'm grateful to God that you're out there on taking care and seeing that the honor that these men and women deserve is bestowed upon them and preserved. Hopefully someday these kids will look back and say thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's always a privilege. It's been a privilege to interview every one of them. And I never knew where in the world they would take me, but that was just part of the fun part. But my books are intended to be very respectful of them. So that's why I wanted their pictures on the front. And my name is on the front, but I want them to be the stars because they did it for us.
They're my heroes and all of us. Well, we appreciate you sharing so much, Kayleen. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being.
That was so much fun. I love honoring our men and women that have meant so much. Hey, do you see that view? The bird's eye view of the Eagle's Nest broadcast facilities here at pjnet.tv. Kayleen thinks I'm talking to her. She can still hear me. She can. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for tonight. And I have really had a lot of fun. I hope that you have gotten if you've got 1/10 as much out of this as I have tonight, I know that it's been good for you too. Before I leave, you've heard a lot about honor. You heard a lot about courage. But I have 2 questions that I ask myself frequently, and I want to share them with you in hopes that you will ask yourself these 2 questions. Here's the first one. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? The second question is, how long ago was that? We've heard a lot about courage. We've heard about a lot of things that happened a long time ago. But a hero requires everyday effort. So I hope that none of us will ever be satisfied with our answer to either of those 2 questions.